controversy over clearing the sidewalks.
Yeah, you have to be off the sidewalks right now altogether.
Currently, we're visualizing firsthand the inherent corruption that's occurring.
Weeks after Portland Mayor Charlie Hales vows to step up enforcement of sidewalk laws.
We're not interested in chasing people around, but we're interested in maintaining a level of civility on the streets.
The city is still dealing with the fallout, including sharp words from former Housing Commissioner Nick Fish. This week on Straight Talk, new Housing Commissioner Dan Saltzman talks about the issue and the solutions being considered. Then, 50 years after the iconic March on Washington, D.C. that ended with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, marchers across the country will commemorate that event and recommit to its goals. Two of the organizers of the Portland March talk about the event and what they hope to accomplish.
From News Channel 8, this is Straight Talk.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight on Straight Talk. I'm Reggie Akey, in for Laurel Porter, who's off this week. On tonight's show, two big issues. A little later on, we're going to look at how Portland plans to commemorate one of the most significant events in the battle for civil rights in America, the 1963 March on Washington, D.C. But first, we'll talk about an issue that has been making headlines here in Portland for weeks. Homelessness, and how the city is currently dealing with it. Our guest tonight is City Commissioner Dan Saltzman. He is the longest serving member of the Portland City Council. This summer, he's taken on a new role at the request of the mayor as head of the Housing Bureau. It's an agency, of course, with a direct connection to solving the homeless problem here in Portland. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Reggie.
So for weeks now, we've been talking about the mayor's new push to essentially get rid of some of the homeless campers that have been outside of City Hall. And what we've witnessed is what is kind of a carousel of homelessness that seems to be happening in the core of downtown. Going from City Hall to the parks across the street, back again, around and around. Are we really getting anywhere with this policy?
Well, you know, the city has a policy of trying to end homelessness, and we may never achieve that, but we do have a goal, and we do have the resources to match to do that. But it does require people wanting to get off the streets. And I think what you see, frankly, with many of the people in front of City Hall or across the street in the parks, and don't take my word for it, you know, take it from some of the homeless providers who've gone down and talked to these people, not a lot of them really have an interest in getting off the streets. But for those who do want to get off the streets, we are investing upwards of $4.6 million a year, an amount that withstood budget cuts that we went through last year that affected police and fire. Our budget for homelessness and for housing actually stayed the same. And I am actually, as Housing Bureau Commissioner, have directed immediately that we spend more resources on helping women get off the streets, women who are often victims of domestic violence and are very vulnerable to sexual assault. And I've spoken with Mayor Hales and actually have, at his recommendation, submitted a memo to him yesterday that could result in further budgeting of upwards of $1.7 million more to end homelessness in Portland.
And Commissioner, certainly we have heard from the mayor talking about what he says is a need to really clear some of these city streets of campers because of a safety issue that he cited. In fact, he said this is not an issue of homelessness, it's an issue of lawlessness. Just today, we heard of an officer who was out there apparently taking photos of some of the campers near the Federal Park downtown, and in that process, and you can see this video here that was taken by one of our viewers, had to arrest someone because a dog came up and bit a female officer. We understand the officer is doing all right. I don't think it really broke the skin. But this is another example of that lawlessness, I suppose, that the mayor is talking about. Were you involved in the decision making in order to have this push to clear the sidewalks by police?
No, I wasn't involved in the decisions to do that, but I was certainly informed about it. The mayor kept all of our offices informed about it. And I think, you know, the video you've just shown, you know, underscores the point I was trying to make a minute ago, is those people that are out there now are really trying to make a larger point. They want to be able to camp anywhere on public property or private property, and that's really the point they're trying to make. And, you know, to a certain extent, the point is that the city's not doing enough to end homelessness. And, you know, I will admit, the homeless problem is increasing in this city, but also, as I said a minute ago, our resources to end homelessness are also increasing and may increase even further as much as early as next month.
I want to look at the numbers because I think some people will be stunned by the number of people who are considered homeless here in the city. And this is a survey that's done every 2 years in January, a literal count of homeless in the city. And that top number is probably the most stunning. It's the largest. It's almost 16,000 people who are considered homeless in the city of Portland. I will say that includes people who are couch surfing, people who are staying with relatives or friends. The number of literally homeless is 2,869. Those are people who are sleeping in cars or on the sidewalks or under bridges, and that number is actually up. And you just acknowledged that. It's up 5% from 2011. My question to you is, if we're clearing the sidewalks outside of City Hall and the parks downtown and other places across the city, where would you have the people who are homeless and who do not want to be homeless, where would you have them sleep at night?
I'd have them sleep in an apartment of their own. And that's one of the things we're investing our resources in, are people like housing specialists, people who can work to avoid evictions, and people who can work with people who are on the streets to find resources, whether it's Social Security or SSI or other types of, or veterans. We have too many veterans on the streets too. Many of those can qualify for benefits, and oftentimes it takes some certified smart people who know how to do that. So part of the proposal that I'm proposing we spend more money on are housing specialists, but also money for short-term rent assistance so that we can get people into apartments off the streets. And we found that if we can do that, get them into an apartment, but also provide them with the backup services to make sure, you're not just putting them in an apartment and say, be successful, that you have support services too. We are finding that 70 to 80% of them are still housed a year later.
I talked to the director recently of a homeless outreach group right here in Portland that I know the city works with as well and sponsors. And part of the problem he was describing to me is that many of the places where the homeless would go into these apartments are not available because of the economy, because people have been kind of stagnant in these entry-level transitional housing programs. They're not moving up, and so the homeless are not taking their place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also, certainly to the extent the economy is stagnant, and we also have the situation where, rental apartments are in high demand here. Our vacancy rate is very low. But that's the other part of what the Housing Bureau does, is we help to stimulate the production of more affordable housing through new construction, or as important, through preserving existing affordable housing. So we have set aside 30% of all urban renewal dollars to go towards producing affordable housing. So we're trying to deal with the supply side of the issue as well.
And it sounds like that is a long-term solution. I want to get to maybe the more short-term solution and show you one of your colleagues, Nick Fish, commissioner who was formerly in charge of housing before you took that role this summer. I want to show you what he said recently, and here's a quote that he gave to the Mercury. He said, "I've heard from many concerned people in our community, and they have asked very profound questions, such as, are we still committed to solving homelessness, or just to displacing it? Who is leading our efforts, and why is the language they are hearing so harsh? The language of epidemics and lawlessness, and why is there so little compassion?" What is your response to Nick Fish's argument that he's making there?
I think that all of us are filled with compassion for people who are homeless. And, after all, they are somebody's daughter or son. And I think when you kind of look at that, the veneer melts away. So I think we are very compassionate, and I think what you're seeing a little bit is the issue of the mayor to reassert the city's right to keep the sidewalks clear and to have no sleeping in our parks. And always the other half of that debate is always, what are we doing more for homelessness? And I think, as I've just described to you, we are, the mayor, under Mayor Hill's leadership, we are discussing about providing more resources to end homelessness. But I think that, also being the new housing commissioner, a couple months on the job, I think that, there are housing advocates that may not legitimately know where I'm coming from yet, and haven't had a chance to get to know me, nor I them. And that's sort of part of the honeymoon period that's going on right now. And I think people will become more assured that, I'm certainly as dedicated as my predecessor, Commissioner Nick Fish, was to this issue.
I think that having talked to, and I know that you have too, but having talked to the people who are out on the streets who feel like they are being kind of pushed around by the city and by police at this point, and I know you said the long-term solution is getting them in apartments, and I can appreciate that. But what about tonight?
Those that want to get into the
Those who want, sure. Yeah. But what about tonight for people who they can't sleep in the parks, They can't sleep on the sidewalks, they can't be under bridges, and many times the shelters that they are going to are full, or they don't qualify for those shelters because they have a family or a number of other circumstances. So where are they to be?
Well, we are working on expanding shelter capacity, but shelter is really not an answer in of itself. I don't have an answer for where all those people can go. We do have shelters that are available, but some people don't want to leave their pets, rightly so. I'm a pet lover. Some people who are couples don't want to be broken up. And we're trying to accommodate as many of those people as we can. But yeah, shelters are not the end-all solution by any means. It's getting people into housing that's more important. But,
so can you understand then why people are confused who are watching the city's policy? If shelter is not the solution and there's not an apartment for someone to move into and they don't want to be homeless, but they're also not allowed to sleep on the streets, why it does seem to some that this is not a compassionate response to them.
I understand how some people will feel that, yes, but I also understand how some people want to know that the sidewalks are going to be clear, and I guarantee you, people do not want people camping in their parks. It may sound good and abstract, but once the camp is established in the park in your neighborhood, you'll be on the phone to my office or the mayor's office saying, "Do something about this."
So how do you stop the carousel? Because it doesn't seem like it's stopping. They're going from park to park to park.
The carousel may never end. It's something that we are going to, the mayor has decided to make enforcement of existing laws done in a more humane way. There's been very few arrests. I mean, you showed us one on TV. I think that makes 5 total arrests there's been since, the mayor's supposed crackdown. So yeah, the carousel may never end, but my job as housing commissioner is to focus on the production of more affordable housing, to make sure we have the resources to get people off the streets, those who want to get off the streets. And as I said, some will simply, when the weather gets colder, they will simply disappear to some other warmer clime. And others that want to help themselves, I think we are offering abilities to help. And not only, it's not just the city, we work with many nonprofit providers, such as Transition Projects, Join, as well as the faith-based community. We're all in this together.
When we call Transition Projects, because that was one of the numbers that was given to some of the homeless campers, to reach out and find a place to be, they told us, we're full, and we've got a months-long waiting list.
Right. That's true.
You're aware of that.
Yeah, and some of the proposals I've put forward will help to get those waiting lists reduced by free up more shelter space. So that's some of the proposals. By working with people who are certified smart about getting people into housing, we can free up the shelters and therefore reduce the waiting list.
Well, I know there was a plan to end homelessness, a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
That didn't work. Obviously, there are still homeless people out there. I know that you have a plan in place, and we'll see how that goes. Dan Saltzman.
We have a plan, but it's probably not going to end homelessness.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you talking to us, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Reggie.
And thanks to our first guest, City Commissioner Dan Saltzman. When we come back, commemorating the March on Washington, a civil rights milestone in the nation's history. And what does the selection of Art Robinson as Oregon Republican Party chair say about the state party? Our commentators tackle that a little later on. Straight Talk is back in just 2 minutes. That is video from 50 years ago, the March on Washington, a push for civil rights that culminated in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. On Saturday, August 24th, a number of community groups will commemorate that march with a march and rally right here in Portland. Joining us tonight to talk about it are 2 of the organizers, Dr. T. Allen Bethel, Senior Pastor of the Maranatha Church, and Dr. Leroy Haynes, Senior Pastor of the Allen Temple CME Church. Both men are leaders in the Albina Ministerial Alliance. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Before we kind of get into some of the questioning, I wanted to just, for our viewers and for all of us, look at some of the statistics about African Americans living in Portland and in Oregon. So I want to show you where we are right now as far as the number of African Americans living in the state and compare it to some other numbers. So right now, the general population in Oregon is about 2% African American, okay? And then the Portland population of African Americans is about 6%. And the reason I bring that up is I want to show you the number of unemployed in the African American community, because as you know, there is a huge wage gap right now. And the number of unemployed African American, 18.4%. White, 8.7%. That number, 18.4%, as both of you know, is very close to numbers that we saw at the beginning of the Great Depression across the United States. I'm not sure that people generally realize how many unemployed people are in our community who are black. And I'm wondering if Dr. Martin Luther King were to come to Portland, Oregon today, would he see that his dream is being fulfilled when looking at numbers like that? Doctor?
I would think that perhaps he would say, did I really dream this? And I think that because of the reality of seeing that it has not really made much progress or change towards what was a great dream and still is a great dream of the equality where people will have the opportunity to work, be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. The economic factors that have come that we're facing today are lasting longer than we anticipated, I think anyone anticipated, and Dr. King would probably hang his head in a little bit of disgust, but yet he would raise his head to say, there is still hope, let's keep this dream alive.
Dr. Haynes, when I was looking at some of the numbers preparing for this, I was astounded to see an article that said, in key measures, African Americans living in the Portland community were better off before the civil rights than they are now. We're talking about education levels, the amount of money each household is making. It's only about half the money that the general population in Portland is making.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. In fact, in the 1963 March on Washington, the issue was jobs and freedom because of discrimination in the job market and discrimination in housing and education. And so jobs and economic development was a center of the march, as well as public accommodation, ending the discrimination and public accommodation. And today when we look at that, we often say in the African American community, if the economy get a cold, then what happens in African American community, we get pneumonia, and that's a ripple effect of what happens in the economy, and it comes in all indexes, whether it's talking about health inequities, whether we're talking about economic development, whether we're talking about jobs, and all those various indexes we are impacted. But key to that is the job. You cannot have a stable family, a stable household, unless there is a stable job and income coming in.
When you hold the march commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, when you have it here in Portland, what will be the issues that you want to tackle and talk about with the crowd?
Justice, equality, and where do we go from here? With the most recent Supreme Court striking down Section 4 of the Voter Rights Act, when we see that happen, we're seeing it seemingly that more and more things are being taken away and we're being set further and further back. I want to point out that we must still continue to cry out for justice. We must still continue to cry out for equality, because we still need jobs. With 18.4% unemployment rate, Dr. King said something in some of his writings that if you give us the dollars, then we can help correct our own problems. We do need the dollars to help address the problems of education, of health, of jobs, of even taking care of our families, and also to stress the matter of fact that we must keep this dream alive. We cannot give up now. We can't stop. We must continue to rise up, come together, and speak with one voice, as the saying goes, and check our egos at the door, because this is about the whole community being better and being served better.
I'm wondering what role the church will play in all of this, and how you've seen that role change. It's always been central, generally, to the African American community in the United States, the church. Are you seeing growth in the church? Are you seeing people leaving the church? What is the trend?
Well, you see a combination of that. The economy, of course, impacts the church. When there's a vast amount of people unemployed, it impacts the income, not only in families, but also the income in churches. And you have issues of illnesses and health issues and depression, all of those things. But the church has always been the central institution in the African American community, for one, dealing with, in the beginning, education, because most educational institutions in the beginning, coming out of emancipation, were organized by the church. And then in terms of economic development, it was that meeting place to take place, and also issues of justice. Those same issues are issues that the church is addressing today, as well as issues within the African American community, like gang violence and other particular issues of family issues that are central to the development of our community. But as Dr. Belter has said, the issues of justice, the issue of accountability with the police, with the Trayvon Martin case, those issues are central. But getting the African American community and others to participate in the economy and also benefit from the growth of the economy as they continue to grow, because our wealth, because of home foreclosure and other issues, the vast amount of wealth was lost more in the African American community and in the Latino community than any other place.
I want to thank you both for being here and talking to us about these issues. We have barely scratched the surface. As you say, 9 minutes, not nearly long enough. But as you say, there's also hope. And 50 years later, there's also a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Thanks again, and good luck at the march that you're going to be holding. I want to let you know more about that in case you want to attend. Again, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, that'll be commemorated next Saturday, August 24th. Marchers are going to leave Terry Shrunk Plaza at 10 a.m. They're going to head to the South Waterfront Park. A rally featuring speakers and music will begin at 1 p.m., and you can meet both of these gentlemen yourselves. Last weekend, one day after the resignation of Suzanne Gallagher as Republican Party chair, party leaders elected a new chair. The winner? Art Robinson, a two-time candidate for Congress in Oregon's 4th District. He's never been shy about taking stands on controversial issues. But will he be able to change GOP fortunes in the state? We asked the question to Lars and David what the selection of Art Robinson says about the Oregon Republican Party.
Straight talk from the left and from the right.
Art Robinson represents a watershed change for Republicans in Oregon, and I applaud the choice by the Oregon Republican Party. Now, of course, I have a dog in the fight as a conservative and a registered Republican. I know Dr. Robinson through my work because he's run for office, and I've interviewed him many times. He's frighteningly smart, and I think that's what has the blue Oregon progressives in an uproar. Oregon is far too liberal, with Democrat Party governors the last 30 years and a liberal legislature. The result? Fewer Fortune 500 companies, declining average wages, devastated industries like fishing, farming, and logging, and some of the highest tax rates in America, failing schools, and a bloated, inefficient government that doesn't serve the public well. In a Democrat-saturated environment, the reaction of Oregon Republicans has always been to nominate moderates for office. Now, imitating the Democrat Party has never worked for Oregon, and it never will. Doc Robinson will change that. And the fact that he's a skeptic on the fairy dust global warming theories drives Democrats crazy and thrills me to no end. Bravo, Republicans, you picked a great leader.
Now, straight talk from the left.
Art Robinson has a personal scientific research institute in Cave Junction, and he argues that human impact on global warming is a fraud. He's also not a big fan of paper money, Social Security, or public schools. He's the new chairman of the Oregon Republican Party, the same party that somehow needs to do better in 21st century Portland. The beliefs of a party chairman don't typically mean much. Raise your hand if you can name the state Democratic chairman. But Oregon Republicans have no governor, no statewide elected officials, no U.S. senators, and no leaders of the legislature. So they may need their state chairman to be more of the face of the party. There's a belief in certain circles, possibly growing during the 30 years since Republicans last elected a governor, that there is a secret, untapped, hard-line conservative vote in Oregon, and that Republicans should just double down and go for it. To believe this, you have to think that deep down, voters in Portland and Washington County don't really care about issues like the environment and public schools. Art Robinson may argue about whether or not the planet is getting warmer, but it's hard to see that the Oregon Republican Party is.
Dr. Haynes, Dr. Bethel, thank you. Next week, Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Have a good night.